We all know that the things that people say to us have a great power in our life. And whether we're young or whether we're old, sometimes we remember those things. And sometimes I think we all know that sometimes we remember most powerfully, most strongly, the negative things that people say to us. Sometimes people can say to us 5, 6, 8, 10 good things, positive things, but they say that one thing and it sticks with us. We're dumb. We're stupid. We're fat. We're not this. We're not that. And we remember that. And even from very little, we can remember it throughout our entire life, and it stays with us. We remember those words, and it affects us. It affects how we think, how we act, and it affects our sense of who we are. Now, we listened today to the story in the first reading of what was said to people who had leprosy, a disease. And what was said to them was that they were unclean. Unclean. And they were told to live in a certain way that made sure that everybody else knew that they were unclean. And the thing that's really bad about this, or difficult about it, it was the religious people. It was as if God was saying to them they were unclean. Unclean. And that God was asking them to live in a way in which they suffered. That they were unclean. They weren't good enough. They weren't good enough to be part of the community. They weren't good enough to be part of God's world. They weren't good enough to be part of the religious world. They were unclean. And the religious world told them that. So if we think about that, and we think about the power of what Jesus does today in the gospel, where another leper comes to Jesus, who's, we imagine how he's lived so isolated, so alone, listening to this, I'm unclean, I'm being punished by God, I'm being punished by the community, I'm not good enough. He comes up to Jesus and says, still in his heart he knows there's something wrong. He knows that he can't fully believe what he's been told, and he says to Jesus, if you will it, you can heal me. If you will it, you can heal me. And the gospel says, the word in the gospel tells us that Jesus got angry, not at the leper. He got angry at the way he had been treated. Because Jesus knew that none of God's children should be treated that way. That whatever was said to this person, no matter if it was said by a religious person or a priest, whoever it was wrong. That in fact, this was not an unclean person, this was the Son of God. And Jesus breaks the taboo, reaches his hand out, touches him, which was a taboo, touches the man and says, I do will it. Be clean. And he changes the man's life. He takes those words that were said to him, he pulls them out of him and restores him to who he's created to be, a son of God, a child of God. So maybe as we listen to this gospel today, all of us sometimes carry things in our life that were told to us, and sometimes by religious people, sometimes by our parents, sometimes by our friends, or those who weren't our friends, and we carry those things about, and sometimes it's good to think about them again, to take them out again, and to say, is it really true what I've carried all these years, what I've thought about myself, what I believed about myself, and does it need to be healed? Can I put it in front of Jesus and say, can you heal me? Do you will it? And we believe today, we hear that word of Jesus says, I do will it. I do will that you be healed. And we remember today, as we celebrate this Eucharist, the power of our own words, to use those words carefully, how we treat one another, how we talk to one another, especially when we use the power of God, or our faith, or religion, to make sure that we, in first and at the end, always remember that the person we're talking to is a child, a son, a daughter of a God who first loves us and asks us to love each other.